Midnight Motorist. We all know what Midnight Motorist is. It has often been called the most confusing FNaF minigame, and for good reason. You know, I told myself I would never make a Midnight Motorist video unless something huge happened that made me feel like I had to talk about it. And guess what? That's right, something huge happened, and it pointed towards the two versions of Midnight Motorist I actually like narratively, which gave me the motivation I needed to talk about it. Before we get into that, I do have to give a mandatory recap of the Midnight Motorist minigame. Don't worry, I'll try to make it quick. It starts with us, the player, driving a purple car through the rain. We drive for a bit before coming to this place in the woods with some kind of mound, which is called a grave in the Ultimate Guide. The Ultimate Guide is a little bit of an unreliable source though, so we don't know for sure if it's a grave, but I have no idea what else it could be. Also, we learn that the Midnight Motor is a yellow person. We then drive to this place called Junior's, which seems to be a bar or a restaurant. It could be Freddy's, like a Fredbear's Jr. or something, which would make the green guy being Henry more likely. But since 5 laps at Freddy's doesn't have any indication that it's Freddy's, I think it's safe to say that's a random place that doesn't matter. Something interesting to note is that the yellow guy isn't allowed in the building for some reason. Driving more takes us to the yellow guy's house, which looks very similar to the FNAF 4 title screen house. Going inside, we see a person wearing a gray blanket or something watching TV. They're telling us to leave him alone tonight. Him seems to be the yellow man's son. Going to his room, we knock on the door, telling him to open it, but he doesn't, and then the yellow man gets pissed off and we storm outside. Going outside, we see an interesting scene. A broken window, shadowed footprints, and one set of animatronic footprints. Something they call out is that the animatronic footprints don't go up to the window, they don't move at all. Seeing this, the yellow man says he ran off to that place again and he'll be sorry when he gets back. With the recap of Midnight Motorist out of the way, let's talk about what made me want to make this video in the first place. Recently, a demo for the Five Nights at Freddy's racing game, 5 Laps at Freddy's, was released, and I'm 99.9% sure this game is a Trojan horse to confirm what Midnight Motorist is about. Not only is the Midnight Motorist track with this section of the minigame in the game, but the logo for the game has the same rainbow pattern as the original FNAF 6 teasers. The thumbnail of the trailer is of Junior's, and above all else, this game seems to confirm who the yellow man is. On the car called the Midnight Motor, which is the same car used in Midnight Motorist, there's an antenna with Spring Bonnie on it. This basically confirms that William Afton himself is the yellow guy. The only way it could get more obvious is if Scott himself came out and said, yellow guy is William Afton. And honestly, looking back, it was kind of obvious. Not only were we driving a purple car, much like William drove in FNAF 2, but the house looks like the title screen house from FNAF 4. The yellow guy also seems to have the same kind of, neck thing going on that William has in FNAF 2 and 3, although to a lesser extent. Not only that, but FNAF 6, William is already connected to the color yellow with Fruity Maze, where one of his text colors is yellow. However, there is still one question. Why is William yellow? Why not purple like every other time we've seen him, besides in FNAF 2 he was pink for some reason? Well, we don't know for sure and most likely never will. However, the explanation I like is that in Midnight Motorist, we're playing as William and viewing everything from his perspective. He doesn't see himself as a man in the shadows, he just sees himself as, a guy. It's also probably something to do with Mic Trap, right? People thought that purple guy was literally purple, so Scott would be showing, no, he isn't. He's, can be any color. So it seems that Midnight Motorist is about William Afton himself, and honestly, I'm happy with that. Afton MM has always been my favorite, even if I didn't believe it for a few months there. However, even if we only have one thing confirmed, there's still a lot left to speculate about, like the entire rest of the minigame. The big questions are who the Runaway is, who the couch person is, who the animatronic footprints belong to, what the mound is, when the minigame takes place, and where the Runaway ran off to. There's also Junior's, but I already talked about what I think that is in the recap. I'll try my best to tackle each of these individually, but there will be some overlap with some of them. I also want to discuss how Midnight Motorist changes the story, not just what it is. Well, I guess it really only changes the story if the crying child is the Runaway, because it would retcon a pretty big thing for FNAF 4. But Mike being the Runaway adds some context to the character motivations, which changes our perception of the story, so I guess the clickbait still works. So now that we're finally done with the intro, let's try to answer all the questions Midnight Motorist provides to us and explain how it changes the story. Let's talk about the easiest question to answer first, when this minigame takes place. As we know, this minigame is called later that night in the files, but after what? Well, this is where we can use the unused description for the Midnight Motor car to help us out. Talk about a killer ride. This smooth cruiser is the perfect choice for anyone wanting to flee a crime scene and win a race. Now, obviously this was removed, but still, it does show what they're going for with the car, at least so far. Using this, we know that during Midnight Motorist, William was driving away from a crime scene, which puts us in the minigame at 3 possible points. After Charlie's murder in 1983, after the MCI in 1985, and after the DCI in 1987. Both 83 and 87 have good evidence. 1985 doesn't really have anything. For 1983, during Midnight Motorist, the same rain graphics as the security puppet minigame are used. And as we know, William drove away after killing Charlie. This implies that the minigame is after Charlie's murder. This makes a lot of sense if you think about it. FNAF 6 was made to clear things up. So the minigame would confirm who dies first depending on who the runaway is. If BV is the runaway, it confirms Charlie first. If Mike's the runaway, it confirms Bite Victim died first. I know technically Charlie can die first with Mike being the runaway, but I don't really think that makes sense because what would this minigame be clearing up then? 1987's evidence is that on the Midnight Motorist car, there are dice with two numbers, 8 and 7, which we obviously can connect back to 1987. This is actually really good evidence. It could theoretically be a random reference, but this car had to have been approved, right, by Scott, and it's already very lore heavy with the spring body antenna. So I'm not sure if Scott would want to put in a random throwaway reference. So does MM take place in 1983 or 1987? Well, the one thing I can say for sure is that Charlie did not die in 1987. A lot of people thought that MM being in 1987 means that, but it really doesn't. MM just wouldn't be after Charlie's death. I wrote the script before we knew about the die, so for the rest of the video I will be operating on the assumption MM is in 1983, but don't worry 1987ers. I'll explain why I think the minigame would be about if it takes place then too. Let's talk about the animatronic footprints outside the window. There are two possibilities I see for this that fit with the shape of the footprints. Shadow Freddy and Golden Freddy, possessed by the Bite Victim. I've also seen the idea that it could be a Scarecrow since William doesn't react to the footprints, but we have no reason to believe that a Scarecrow type character exists, so I doubt it. William probably didn't react to the footprints because he didn't notice them, or Scott didn't feel the need to have William react to them. Let's talk about Golden Freddy first. The evidence for this is that in the movie, Golden Freddy leaves the pizzeria and goes to Mike's house to take Abby. The footprints being Golden Freddy could explain why there's only one set. As we know, Golden Freddy can teleport, and there's only one set of footprints, meaning the animatronic never walked anywhere. I'm sure you guys can see the connection. Furthermore, the week before seems to confirm that the crying child is somehow connected to Golden Freddy, with him crying right before Ralph is killed by an animatronic who is most likely Golden Freddy. He would be going to Mike's room to try and get him out to go somewhere, probably Freddy's or the mound. The problem with Golden Freddy being the footprints is that we don't know what level of control Crying Child has over Golden Freddy. And also, I'm not sure if the movie is the best evidence because the situations are completely different. I like this interpretation, although I am going to have to disagree with it. Now let's talk about Shadow Freddy, who seems to be the footprints of Midnight Motorist, and how much this game connects Shadow Freddy and Charlie. In the opening minigame, Shadow Freddy is there blocking Freddy as he tries to give kids pizza. The opening minigame is actually a recreation to Take Cake to the Children, the first time we saw Charlie's murder. We know this because the FNAF 6 teasers have Cake Bear turn into the same Freddy sprite as the opening minigame, so there's already a connection there. Let's turn to Charlie's vessel in this game, Lefty. I am 99.9% sure Lefty is supposed to be referenced to Shadow Freddy. Why? Because it seems very likely that all the antagonists of FNAF 6 represent the main antagonists of FNAF 1 to 5. Molten Freddy is possessed by the spirits of the MCI, FNAF 1, Scrap Baby's baby, sister location. William is FNAF 3, and Lefty is both FNAF 2 with the puppet and FNAF 4 with the actual animatronic. The animatronic of Lefty is a black bear, much like the antagonist of FNAF 4, Nightmare. And Nightmare is Shadow Freddy, as we learn in the game files, and that much like Shadow Freddy, he is a Fredbear recolor. Speaking of being related to Golden Freddy, Lefty has Golden Freddy's role of being the odd one out of the rest of the group. And again, Shadow Freddy is a Golden Freddy recolor, so I'm very confident Lefty is supposed to represent Shadow Freddy. He's connected to Charlie somehow. So wouldn't it make sense for him to show up in a minigame related to Charlie's death, which is what Midnight Motorist is, unless it takes place in 1987. And I can't think of any other problems with Shadow Freddy being the footprints, so I'm 95% sure Shadow Freddy's the footprints, but now we must ask, where is he taking them? I guess we can also ask why. It's probably agony or something, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. There are only three options I can see for where the runaway ran off to. The mound, Juniors, Freddy/Fredbears. Something important to note is that the runaway has ran off to this place multiple times. I think we can safely say Juniors isn't where the runaway ran off to. Like I said, it seems to be a bar. I doubt they would let a kid in there in the middle of the night. Also, there's not any other hints that this is where the runaway ran off to. The mound is the next option, but honestly, I don't think the runaway ran off here either. I think this is because there are no footprints near the mound or in the area at all. You could make an argument that the runaway just hasn't arrived at the mound yet, but I feel like if Scott wanted us to know the runaway ran off here, he would have included some sort of clue, but he really didn't. Not Juniors, and it's not the mound, so that leaves Freddy's. I don't think it's just some random place that we haven't been introduced to that makes no sense. So I'm guessing that Shadow Freddy brought the runaways to Freddy's for some reason. Maybe he wanted to get the agony from the runaway, or maybe he wanted to recreate Charlie's murder, since it does seem that he recreates William's actions. So now we know when the minigame takes place, who the footprints are, and where the runaway ran off to. Now we have to get into the much more complicated questions. The runaway, couch person, and the mound. Let's start with the runaway and couch person since they go hand in hand. Identifying the runaway and the couch person is key to figuring out what this minigame is about. Let's take a look at couch person's design and what they're doing. They're wearing gray and are watching TV, and let's be honest, this is very similar to Michael Afton, who in FNAF 4 wore gray, spoke in gray, and sister location watched TV between nights. Michael being couch person would mean the runaway's crying child. Crying child being the runaway would mean that he saw Charlie's corpse. This could be what he saw in FNAF 4 that made him fearful of the animatronics, while Mike being the couch person makes sense by looking at the couch person, the rest of the minigame, taking that into account, is kind of weird. And I'm not talking about the couch person defending the crying child, even though in FNAF 4 Mike bullies him. That can make sense. It would be weird for Mike to bully his brother even after he saw a child's corpse. If we look at the runaway's behavior, it doesn't fit with what we know about the crying child. He would not follow an animatronic who was outside his window. He probably wouldn't lock his door either. With what we've seen from him, he would most likely curl up in a ball and cry. You could argue that this is before he saw what he saw, with under him being the runaway would be Charlie's corpse. It's a fair argument, but there's a problem. We know the crying child saw something in the shadows that he misinterpreted, and there's nothing to misinterpret about a dead girl in an alley. Some people think he could have seen the scene as the puppet killing Charlie, which would then explain why he's scared of the animatronics, but he isn't scared of the puppet. He's scared of, the actual animatronics. Crying child seeing Charlie's corpse would be a retcon that is useless. Like I said, it doesn't really fit his personality. In fact, the runaway fits Mike's personality better, as Mike has seen to be fearless, basically. Not fearless, but like, he is willing to do the stuff he does in Midnight Motorist. He would follow an animatronic outside his window. Also, can we bring up the house? This is not the FNAF 4 minigame house. This fits with the FNAF 4 title screen house much better. And the title screen house isn't the FNAF 4 minigame house either, meaning it kind of has to be Mike's house, because we play as Mike in FNAF 4, why else would this random house be there on the title screen? Literally has the nightmares following the protagonist home. If crying child was the runaway, that means that the Aftons moved closer to the place that William didn't want the crying child going to for basically no reason. At least under Mike being the runaway, there's some sort of reason for the move. They moved to get out of the public eye after the crying child's death. And it's the house Mike will live in until his adult years. Hell, even if it's not the FNAF 4 house, it would still make sense for them to move under Mike being the runaway. Also, Mike being followed home or an animatronic invading Mike's house is sort of a theme in the series. In FNAF 4, he was followed home by something. In the non-canon sister location ending, he's followed home by Ennard, so Mike being followed home in MM would just make sense. Especially with Shadow Freddy going to Mike's house. That is basically the plot of FNAF 4's gameplay. Midnight Motorist would be setting up that plot point after it already happened, but still. There's just one huge problem with Mike being the runaway, which is couch person. I don't care what anyone says, Mike being couch person is a reasonable conclusion. I mean, who else could it be if not Mike? There's only one person it can be, and that is Mrs. Afton, which I know sounds like a stretch, but hear me out. We know that Mike already looks like William, and they have multiple narrative parallels, right? So if Mike already takes after one parent, would it not be unreasonable to assume he takes after the other? And that's why Couch Person has a lot of Mike connections. Mike takes after his mom in personality, interests, and other things. This works well if you believe that the Immortal and Restless is about Mrs. Afton and William, because in the logbook, Mike says he relates to Clara, which would be his mom's representation. Now, I think the Immortal and Restless is just about Mike and William, but I do think it's possible that it's about both Mrs. Afton and Mike, and the show just represents multiple things. But still, I thought it was worth bringing up. Also, Mike being the runaway makes sense since Mike is actually relevant to FNAF 6. Alright, let's talk about the mound now. The mound is arguably the most mysterious part of this minigame. We don't even know what it is for sure. What we do know, for sure, is that it is important and not just a random thing that was thrown in like I've seen some people say. Come on guys, Scott makes dumb decisions, but I don't think he would add a random mound for no reason. So what is it? Well, it's probably a grave, since that's what the Ultimate Guide calls it. So whose grave? That depends on who you believe the runaway is. Or does it? Because I think we could safely say that this is the crying child's grave. Why? Well, it's kind of simple. You have to play Midnight Motorist to unlock the secret grave ending, with the graves of all the important kids who have died in the series, although there is a noticeable lack of the crying child here. That's because we already saw his grave in Midnight Motorist, unmarked, so we wouldn't know his name because Scott wants to be mysterious about it for some reason. I didn't pull this out of nowhere. In FNAF World, there are 6 graves all together right next to each other. These are most likely supposed to be William's victims since they are right next to Purple Guy. However, if you walk a little, you will find a 7th hidden grave near Fredbear who's connected to the crying child. It's pretty much showing that their graves are separated, right? I'm pretty sure this is the crying child's grave. He's separated from the rest because he wasn't killed by William. So yeah, I think it's safe to say the mound is the crying child's grave. Now you might be wondering, why is the grave in the middle of the woods and not a cemetery? And that's a good question. We can only speculate. Private burials are legal, but why would William bury him close by? My best guess is that he kept it nearby to experiment. It seems very likely that William is the final speaker of FNAF 4. And he said he will put the crying child back together, so he would have to have access to his body to figure out how to do that. There's also that one Curse of Dreadbear level where we experiment on Dreadbear who may represent the crying child, but I'm not really sure if he does. The other options for the mound are Elizabeth and Mrs. Afton, but Elizabeth probably doesn't die first for multiple reasons that I won't get into today, and Mrs. Afton is a good explanation for CC being the runaway, but unlike CC being the mound, there isn't any evidence for her being the mound that I know of. Alright, and let's recap, because that was a lot. I believe Midnight Motorist is about Mike running away to Freddy's after being lured by Shadow Freddy. He broke his window, or Shadow Freddy broke it, it doesn't really matter. Mrs. Afton is couch person. There are problems with this, of course, but it's the same problem with every MM theory, which is that we have to assume a lot of things. I hope I explained my reasoning in a way that you guys can at least see where I'm coming from. Now that we're done with this boring evidence stuff, let's talk about how it affects the actual interesting thing, the narrative. Mike being the runaway and seeing Charlie's corpse could affect the story in a few ways. The most simple is that it gives Mike a personal connection to Charlie, which makes sense considering Mike has a personal connection to every other antagonist at FNAF 6. Molten Freddy killed him, and William and Elizabeth are his family. The odd one out would be Charlie. Even if you think Mike is Fritz from FNAF 2, I still wouldn't say they have a personal connection. So Mike seeing Charlie's corpse would give them a personal connection. Now let's talk about what else Mike seeing Charlie might connect to. Michael's motivations. If we look back at the Immortal and the Restless, Clara, what we talked about earlier, represents Mike in some way. He's constantly asking Vlad, who is either William or Fazbear Entertainment, to take responsibility for the baby, which is probably all the crimes at Freddy's. I've always assumed this minigame was showing what happened after FNAF 1. However, what if it had instead been happening in 1983 when William killed Charlie? Mike is accusing William of killing children much earlier than I thought, at least. And maybe you guys too. I don't know what you believe. This could be why he worked at Freddy's. He didn't work there for free pizza. He wanted to know the truth about what happened. This would technically be a retcon with like Crying Child seeing Charlie's corpse, but unlike that, it wouldn't contradict anything. Also, something else to think about. Crying Child was always scared of being hurt or killed at Freddy's, right? After seeing something that we know may be innocent, but he thought was dangerous. We can assume Mike made fun of this fear because, let's be honest, it was unreasonable. However, well, actually, I guess it wasn't considering what happened to him. If Mike did see Charlie's corpse, he would be put in the Crying Child's position, much like in FNAF 4, where he is a scared child, scared of the animatronics. You know, that's some good writing right there. Seeing something dangerous at Freddy's, unlike whatever the Crying Child saw, this is a real threat and a real thing that happened. He would find out that his brother wasn't so crazy after all. Furthermore, Mike seeing Charlie's corpse would show that Michael has always been connected to William's crimes, which is just neat. Not a huge narrative thing with that, I just think it's cool. And those are all the ways I can think about how my interpretation of Midnight Motorist affects the story. Now let's talk about if it's in 1987. If it's in 1987, it would have to take place right after the DCI. I know there's a problem with the description saying William fled the scene and then saved them. He's not really running, he's still there. I guess you could say he fled after he killed them or after he cleaned up, right? The footprints would either be Shadow Freddy or Golden Freddy, and Mike would run away to Freddy's for reasons I talked about earlier. I'm assuming they brought him there to see the DCI's bodies. Why? Well, it depends. If it's Shadow Freddy, he's doing it for agony, I guess. And if it's Golden Freddy, I think he wants Mike to help the DCI or save them. Do you guys get it? Because it's what the minigame is called in FNAF 2. I think Golden Freddy makes more sense under Midnight Motorist being in 1987, although Shadow Freddy does have the FNAF 4 parallels, so it's probably him. Alright, that's what the minigame is about, but why? Why do we need to know Mike saw the DCI? What does that clear up? Well, I think I know, guys, and you guys might think I'm crazy, but I think it's Mike being Fritz. I mean, think about it. Mike followed a bear standing outside his window to Freddy's where he saw 5 dead kids. Wouldn't you want to figure out what's going on as soon as possible? This minigame will explain why Mike worked at Freddy's. He's trying to figure out what's going on, kind of like what I talked about earlier, and showing why he was there at FNAF 2. This also ties into the Immortal and Restless because, again, the whole plot there is Mike asking William to explain everything, right? This can even explain why Mike is using aliens in FNAF 2. He might be a witness in the DCI case, and he probably couldn't work there as a witness, so he uses a fake name. The same name as one of the missing children. Basically, MM being in 1987 would still explain Michael's motivations and debunk Mike's accomplice while also giving great evidence to Mike Fritz, or at least making it make sense. I might just have to start believing this one, guys. And finally, I am done with this video. I can tell this is going to take a while to edit, but at least I don't have to think about Midnight Motorist until 2025. But guys, I'm curious, what do you think Midnight Motorist is about? Let me know in the comments. And while you're down there, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.